Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke Academy. Joining me today, I have Bill Rice Jr. The chances are good you've seen me on a platform called Substack. Substack has grown like crazy. Bill and I met each other through Substack, and we talk a lot about free speech, the importance of a free press, and media, all those sorts of things. Bill has a growing presence. It's huge and growing on Substack and is actually expanded recently. Bill is in Troy, Alabama, and set up a Substack that's specific to his area. I'm actually kind of jealous of that. I'm thinking I might kind of follow suit. Bill, can you give us a little bit of background on you, how you got started on Substack, and where you see the future of that platform?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. One of the neat things about Substack is I've met so many fascinating and smart people just like yourself. So it's an honor to be on your show. I found Substack later than many people did. It was probably after the lockdowns of COVID that I discovered it. At the time, I was a freelance journalist trying to sell my articles and write stories that interest me. And I quickly found out that the stories I wanted to write, Jonathan, the people that still publish freelance journalism were not interested in running. So my freelance journalism business was basically a flop. I got a few paying gigs, but not many. I then segued into sharing my opinions on COVID on Facebook. Well, I was on Facebook and repeatedly got put on Facebook timeout for violating community standards, is the phrase I think they use. And I wanted to opine on what was happening in the world. And by default, I discovered this neat writers platform, Substack, where I could write whatever articles I wanted to, and in effect, Jonathan, be my own publisher and editor. About 28 months ago, I launched a Substack newsletter and wrote primarily on COVID topics. And as you know, my main area of focus on COVID was this hypothesis that the virus had begun to spread early. I call that early spread. And because I had a unique niche and did a lot of research on that topic, my Substack grew, and big sites started linking to my articles. Places like Citizen Free Press and the Brownstone Institute. I'm now a Brownstone Fellow, which I'm very proud of. And so articles that, you might think would only get 2,000 reads on Substack, once they were linked by Citizen Free Press or Brownstone or Zero Hedge, suddenly started getting 50, 70, 100,000 reads. And that's how a obscure freelance writer in a little town in South Alabama grew his page views and my audience. And as you noted recently, to try to get more paid subscribers, which is really important to a freelance writer, I started a local Substack, which I'm calling the Troy Citizen, which has a completely different focus. It's local human interest stories with a strong emphasis on local history. And so about 6 weeks ago, I started my second Substack, which I'm calling a Substack newspaper. There's very few local Substack newspapers. So I'm now doing a local Substack newspaper and still doing my contrarian investigative journalism work for a national Substack, which is called Bill Rice Jr.'s newsletter. And I think that brings us up to today.
For purposes of listeners to UnWoke Academy, I've brought up the sources of news, but also writing style and the aptitude and intelligence level of the authors. In a few instances, I've mentioned places like the Epoch Times. I'm a subscriber to the Epoch Times. I get the print and digital editions. And in the Epoch Times, one of the things that stands out to me, and once you notice it, you can't unnotice it, is it's written for more intelligent people. And unfortunately, and it's just a byproduct of decades of dumbed down education in the US, but don't get me started on that, K through 12. But the upgrade in competence and trust in the reader from sources like Epoch Times is apparent. And they say that the most major rag newspapers, not just being leftist, but also written to something like a 6th grade reading competency. Bill Rice stands out in my book as a skilled writer. Not only does he write well, do good investigation, present it well, it's really interesting to read, and kind of what I call his voice is compelling, but it's also written in a very intelligent way. So kudos for that. I greatly appreciate that. I had to interject that. But also, for anybody listening, I want to encourage you to think a little bit differently about how we consume news media. And it boils down to subscription. We've hit a threshold in the United States. We see the death of legacy media, and I've been calling it for months. We see it collapsing all over, with major legacy media dropping off like flies. They have very, very little trust in the public and very little viewer and readership. The substitute is citizen journalism. We see it in comments from people like Elon Musk, and we see it in posts like those that Bill Rice Jr. puts on platforms like Substack. The way that we're going to encourage that is just like put your money where your mouth is. Let's lead with encouragement, and people like Bill Rice, and they need to have funding to continue to do the work that they do. I've mentioned it in the context of UnWoke. We've switched to a subscription model ourselves. Bill Rice, when you find him, I think you're really going to enjoy his Substack. I'm going to ask him to say it again, the name of the Substack. When you do, and you find people like Bill Rice that are good, that are hardworking, that are intelligent, that are saying the truth and countering the narrative, if you find opportunity to support them financially, please do. Bill, what's the name of your Substack again?
Bill Rice Jr.'s newsletter. Just my name. I'm a junior. Bill Rice Jr.'s, I think it's apostrophe S, newsletter. So if you went to Substack and typed in Bill Rice Jr.'s newsletter, you should find me. And I'll segue into your remarks, Jonathan, and just echo them, that it's far more important than most people realize to, if they can, support their favorite Substack authors, for a very simple reason. The content you're going to receive on Substack is 180 degrees from what you're going to find at the New York Times, Washington Post, or your local Gannett newspaper. We're not going to be stenographers of what I call the authorized narrative, the Tony Fauci line. We're going to challenge these people that have absolute power, in my opinion. So if you want this type of vital journalism to continue, it helps to support people like me. Now, I understand that not everybody that has a Substack newsletter is in my position. My only income is from Substack. Many people that are on Substack are retired, they're affluent, they have a pension, or they have a spouse who has a high income, and they are writing because they enjoy writing. It's almost a hobby. So those people will continue to be on Substack. I'm talking about the person that's working 8 to 10 hours every day, researching important topics, marketing their site every way they can, trying to bring attention to topics that are taboo in the mainstream media. And people like us, to make a living, you need to make X thousands of dollars. For me, my magic figure, Jonathan, which I disclose all the time, I don't mind talking about my Substack metrics, would be 1,000 paid subscribers, which should net me approximately $45,000. You can't make a living on $45,000 even in Troy, Alabama, if you have a family of 4 and 2 young children like I have. But my wife is a school teacher, so if I could make $40,000 on Substack plus my wife's teacher's salary, I could live comfortably. In the last 2 years, although my Substack has grown to about 7,000 total subscribers, and at one time with 305 paid subscribers, that's now fallen to 296. We can talk about that, why that might have happened. My annual income from Substack net, after Substack and Stripe, the payment processor, take their cut, it's about $14,000 a year. So you can see what a challenge it is to make a living just doing this type of journalism.
And that's just completely backward. I mean, I can't quote any off of the top of my head, but I have a really strong sense that some of these people who are sort of the talking head figureheads of legacy media are making in the many millions of dollars a year to spew propaganda and to frequently or most often perhaps be wrong and harmful and damaging. And yet we've got people like Bill Rice Jr., who's out there delving into the details, bringing the receipts, and researching and reporting on really fundamentally, critically important issues and struggling to make a living at it. That's not right. We need to fix that. Bill Rice Jr. Bill is not alone in this. I've talked to many other people who work in journalism who have similar stories. We need to do a better job, my friends, in society of cultivating and encouraging better news, the real news, the truth. The truth can be uncomfortable, but if it's not uncovered, we have no real starting point for formulating and developing our society. And I have said it before, I'm going to continue to say this. Building concepts of our society and truth and justice and the American way based on propaganda and lies, that will get us nowhere fast. We need to have better understanding of what's actual truth around us. That's the bedrock foundation. And people like Bill out there fighting, working, researching, and reporting on key topics, we need a lot more of it. And it's not going to happen if Bill and people like him can't keep a roof over his family's head and food on the table.
Thank you. You know, it's backwards, isn't it, Jonathan? You've got the people who are being subsidized by Bill Gates journalism grants or big pharma ad buys, who I would argue their main job is concealing the truth. They're certainly not searching for the truth. And then you have people like me and hundreds of other Substack authors who are trying to search for the truth, reveal the truth. And, you know, we're competing against the dwindling number of people in the newsrooms who are getting paid salaries and benefits. That number's dwindling. As you point out in your opening, you know, the mainstream media is dying. But still, there's enough of these reporters in these newsrooms where they can make $60,000 to $120,000 every year writing the stories they're supposed to write. So it's what's happening on Substack is hugely important in my opinion, and Substack has moved the needle and changed some narratives because we've kind of crowdsourced real journalism, and some of these storylines have broken through a little bit into the mainstream. It would be very sad to think of the world today if Substack had not been created in 2017. Think of all the great journalists who have published important work on Substack who wouldn't have been able to do that. So we can talk about, you know, has Substack peaked? Is there COVID fatigue or people subscribing to too many Substacks? They can't read them all. You know, you've got terrible inflation, real inflation as I call it, and so people have to make ends meet, cut out paid subscriptions, which I understand. I'm in that group. I have to pause my paid subscriptions often. So, but still, let's cross our fingers that we have a platform like this, and then as you and I have talked off the air, you know, that maybe there needs to be another model that would better support independent writers than what we have, which is not to say do away with Substack. We don't want that to happen, but there has to be another model for Substack that will benefit writers like myself and readers and news consumers who want alternative media than the one we have right now, which is not to say I'm for the demise of Substack. I'm a huge supporter of Substack, and we need Substack, but the vast majority of authors, and there's over 20,000 Substack authors and Substack users, and there's more than 40 million Substack users in the world, are experiencing subscription fatigue, COVID fatigue. I wonder, you know, has Substack hit its peak? but we're brainstorming on plan B or another plan than just Substack to better tackle some of these issues.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm not sure that I'm in complete agreement on a couple of levels. The first is when we look at people's consuming behaviors on streaming web services for video content, there seems to be sort of endless appetite, and there are all these different apps and everything. And we happen to have Roku in our house, and there are something like 3,000 or 5,000 channels. I've lost track recently on Roku. Many of them have subscription service, and many of those seem to enjoy robust and growing subscriptions. So the same people who are willing to spend 8, 10, 12, 16 or more dollars per month on Roku channels, I think some of those people, and I encourage you to think this way, my viewing audience, think in those terms. What are you getting actually for subscription service to streaming video? It's entertaining, but is it helping to make a better society in the future? And I completely, absolutely argue that good journalism does shape the future of our nation and the West and the world. We need to be doing a much better job of comparing apples to apples. What is it going toward? And there are plenty of people that I know that have all kinds of different varying subscriptions per month. You might have media content and streaming and different gaming apps and all those sorts of things. At some point, tally those up and compare what you're getting and maybe make some changes. Or if you're able to financially add additional subscription content, find things online like journalists like Bill Rice and help support them, because it's the wave of the future. Look at it in these terms. And we've talked a little bit about what's the term for it? People are calling it the self-canceling of legacy media. They're doing it to themselves. And I think they just can't help themselves, especially when Trump comes into the equation. They can't help but fall on their own sword. And it's almost sort of entertaining to watch. But at the same time, we see clear signs that conservative media outlets have been under attack for 4 or 5 years. We saw it with the cancellation and closure of the social media platform Parler. Parler was closed. We've seen attacks against media organizations like War Room, One America News, even going after the CFO of Epoch Times.
Well, they went after Tucker Carlson, who had the #1 rated news talk show in America. You would think if you had the #1 news talk show in America, you would be unfireable. Yep. We thought wrong. And then Tucker did what? He went off and went independent, and where he used to have 5 million viewers a night, sometimes his podcasts have 100 million.
I've seen many that Tucker Carlson has released that are north of 200 million, 200 to 300 million viewers, compared to legacy media that in his heyday there, and he was the premier, having 5 to maybe 6, 9 million is apples to zebras. It's a major monumental shift in the way that we consume media. And Tucker Carlson happens to be a good example. He's somebody that went to a subscription model, and it's working. It's working because people value the content. And I mean, there are all kinds of examples that I can think of. One of them is this growing shift that I'm sensing. And actually, I was just in a great communication yesterday with somebody who works in alternative healthcare and medicine about kind of shifting the way that we think of and consume food. So think of fast food. It's there, it's easy, it's cheap, it's sort of served up to us in these little cute packaging. But for a lot of people, it makes sense for them to go organic, non-GMO, and look at the nutritional value of the things that they're eating. In a very similar way, look at the news that you're consuming and the stories that we consume. And this gets a little bit complex, but you know me, I'm a numbers guy and I work in finance. There is sort of this misnomer, there's a misconception that fast food is cheaper. But you look at the big picture long term for the health implications for you and your family. I think we're finally gradually coming around to the notion that the long-term health impacts of eating a lot of fast foods and consuming that garbage, the stuff that's packaged and has all kinds of harsh chemicals that are banned in other parts of the world. We consume that stuff and we grow unhealthy because of it. And then we have major long-term health implications with huge cost. The analogy works here. When we look at the way that we consume the free, I'm going to air quote that, the free media that's served up to us, telling us stories and propaganda, versus trying to find better sources, people that actually care and they're doing the research and they bring the receipts and they're giving us truth. The difference is monumental. It means probably the difference between saving America, and you know the expression people are using, we've got a country to save.
It's ironic or counterintuitive because so many Americans do not trust the mainstream media. But I think the key to solving a lot of these issues will come from journalism, because it's journalism that creates the narratives that create the policies and the mandates, as we recently saw. You have bogus and false journalism, you're going to have dangerous and harmful policies flowing from it. The answer is to get accurate, truthful journalism to the mainstream. On Substack, which has an army of great storytellers, that content can still be dismissed as being kooky, extreme, misinformation, disinformation. That's why Substack hadn't had more of an influence, is the content produced on Substack has been dismissed fraudulently. Once some of these stories, taboo stories like the embalmer's clots, or early spread, when did this virus really start, or the vaccines are not safe. Once those stories go mainstream, the whole world changes, and as you say, Jonathan, you can save the world. And I don't know if we're going to have time to get into it, but the key to the operation for the powers that be, as some of us call our leaders, is to stifle or thwart or muffle the contrarian truth seekers. That's why we have this huge censorship industrial complex. These people are telling the truth, vitally important truths, but their message is not reaching enough people. So that's what we've got to change.
I'm going to put in a plug for Clotastrophe. If you've been watching UnWoke.Academy for some time now, you may have caught the interview, the discussion that I had with Laura Kasner and Tom Haviland on Clotastrophe. And those are the folks that are leading the charge on researching with embalmers and finding those clots that have shown up and have grown very suspiciously since the introduction of these the jabs and jab mandates. So go back and I would for sure go and find Clotastrophe.
I'm going to write about it. I've written about Clotastrophe and have gotten to know Laura and Tom, and the most famous embalmer, Richard Hirschman, lives 30 miles south of me in Ozark, Alabama. I've done stories on Richard. But I agree, John, that what those people are working on is the most thermonuclear seismic narrative destroying thread that's out there right now. I told Laura the other day, if we could raise enough money just to buy thousands of billboards across America and just splash pictures of these actual white fibrous clots, which look like long, terrifying worms, and just let people look at them as they're driving down the highway, I think that would end the clots and the boosters overnight. It's surreal to me that probably 85% of the American population is unaware that hundreds of embalmers are finding these clots every day, every week, and have been for years. And nobody in an official capacity will investigate what's causing these clots. So that's a perfect example of explosive stories being told in the alternative media that are not reaching the mainstream due to intense, coordinated censorship efforts that have worked, that have been successful.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. And so there's a reason that platforms and news organizations are smeared by legacy mainstream media. It's not
They're
just
not doing it for kicks and giggles. They're doing it for a reason. That's right.
they're doing it for a reason. And it's not just trying to weed out and weaken their competitors. It's trying to maintain the narrative. So there is big money. So let's just, in case anybody doubts me on that comment, let's follow the money, because that's a big part of what UnWoke is and does. You look at the amount of money that goes to fund legacy media from big pharma. Pharmaceutical companies, all you have to do is just turn on any streaming service. Speaking of streaming services, what are those full of? Those are full of pharmaceutical ads. I know, because sometimes we have streaming in our house, and it seems to be constant.
I would say it's 60% on network TV and the Netflix, Hulu streaming services. It's every other commercial at least is paid for by big pharma.
So you look at the big pharma money that's flowing into these streaming services and quasi-news organizations, they're really propping them up. So as their viewership drops, they're still able to pay big salaries to the propagandists, the talking heads, because they have all that pharma money. Well, that's just a broken system entirely. And we fix that by going to a subscription-based model where you know what you're getting. But I want to pause for a moment and interject a perspective on the Substack platform. I don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. I'm actually a big fan of Substack. I do a lot of work there, but Bill and I have had this conversation several times about diversifying. We really need to have this important content, things like the catastrophe and the things that Bill is investigating and reporting on multiple different platforms. I'm always a little bit, at least a little bit, suspicious of any platform. And yes, that also includes X and Elon Musk. We can't afford as a society to have all of our information, all news on one platform. We saw, and here's a great example in my book, because this is one that really hit me kind of like a gut punch. On the social media platform Facebook years ago, I started following Brandon Strock and the Walk Away movement. If you're not familiar with that, I suggest looking it up. Brandon Strock and the Walk Away movement were a parade of people, all very glowingly positive, upbeat, wonderful people who had broken the narrative. They'd walked away from the leftist globalist, walking away from the Democrat Party, being disenfranchised by what the Democrat Party has become. But all of it was really positive, people encouraging each other. It wasn't necessarily a move into the Republican Party, but it was encouraging. It was beautiful. The stories were amazing. Overnight, it was shut off. Flip of a switch, very much like the social media platform Parler, it was just turned off. If that were to happen to a voice like Bill's or Catastrophe or UnWoke.Academy, all of the research, we've years of research into the woke on Wall Street and globalist banks. We can't afford to lose that. So if you're listening to this and thinking about your own content and where it is, or maybe you're considering starting something, go for it. Get out there, start developing content, start becoming part of the voice and the movement that pushes back. But don't rely entirely on any one platform.
I was recently attended a Brownstone Institute retreat in Connecticut. Wasn't all the Brownstone writers. It was about 30 or 40 of us. And I was struck by the number of writers who were once leftists, liberals, communists, real communists, card-carrying communists. And then there were many like me that were from a conservative or a libertarian background, but it was nice to see how many former statists have recoiled from this movement of censorship and state control and global government, so that there are more people that are questioning what's happening in the world from both sides of both political spectrums than people might realize. And those voices are censored. It was a proactive measure. I think that our leaders said we're going to implement a mRNA vaccine program, but we know that before we do that, we have to proactively stop any dissent or criticism that's going to come from these movements. And that logic meant that they had to have a massive censorship organization already set up. That's one of the things that shocks and scares me is when you think about the level of coordination and the time frame it took to, start the Stanford Virality Institute and the Trusted News Initiative. I mean, this is not something that just popped up in the year 2020. They've been planning this for a while, all to block voices like yours and mine. It's an Orwellian 1984 type world that we're living in my opinion. And they can't all of a sudden say, oh, never mind, we're going to have a sabbatical on the censorship. They can't go back and allow free speech, in my opinion, because if they did that, the truth would come out. And if the truth would come out, the masses would be coming for these people with the proverbial pitchforks. Some people think that we have a new president and all of this censorship is going to stop. Maybe some of it will, but I'm in the group that thinks they have to continue these efforts because of self-preservation reasons. The truth is out there and there are people looking for it, and most people don't realize it yet. But if the man on the street did realize it, we would have a upheaval in the world like the world has never seen before. So to prevent this, it will continue to be a impetus or initiative to silence or thwart people like myself, which I think is happening even on Substack. If I look at my Substack trends, which were once excellent and growing rapidly, in the last 7 or 8 months, those have stalled and reversed. And, a part of that might be the COVID fatigue or subscription saturation. That's all true. But I also wonder if a part of that might be some kind of intentional subterfuge that I don't understand. So there's a level of paranoia that people like me have, but it's based on looking at our own metrics and a degree of common sense, and you reach the conclusion that the writers who are over the target, so to speak, or are a threat to some of these lies might still be targeted, and it doesn't take a Sherlock Holmes to figure out why certain people would be targeted.
Well, there's a big tell in mainstream media, legacy media's coverage of world events. When we're seeing things like the protests that have taken place in the Netherlands and parts of Europe and in Brazil fairly recently, there's virtually no coverage in mainstream media. And I want to I'm so thankful to have had this experience. In 1986, I had opportunity to travel into East Berlin before the wall came down. So I spent some time on the other side of the wall, literally. And as German as a second language, I became moderately fluent and had conversations with people all over Germany about their experiences with communism on the east side of the wall, on the other side of the Berlin Wall, as well as their interactions and experience with people who had firsthand knowledge of the German Socialist Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party, the word socialist being operative here. But there's an element that came out of that learning curve and that discovery process, spending time living in central Germany and being on the other side of the wall. There's a little known factoid about the wall and how it came down. We all remember it was Ronald Reagan who stood there and said, tear down this wall. And there were all sorts of protests. But what people don't realize is that right around that time, a new piece of technology called the fax machine was invented. And fax machines were smuggled in, and they were able to thwart surveillance. Pretty much everything by the Stasi, which was the East German police and military, all communications, virtually everything, everybody, all the time was monitored, and nobody felt safe communicating on news and information or strategy or meeting times or locations or organizing protests. Fax machine changed that. My reason for bringing that up is today's fax machine is platforms like Substack. It's the internet. It's our ability to open, maintain, and host websites with content that gets the news out. The left don't like that, so they come after them. If you're listening to this, I implore you, please, if you hear anybody say, don't listen to such and such platform or news outlet, that they're terrible or whatever, they're going to fill in the blank with some sort of name calling. And it's always like racist or anti-LGBTQ plus or xenophobic or
Science, anti-vaxxer.
Yep. Something like that, just to try and cloud your mind and get you to not pay attention to that platform. There's a reason. And going back to follow the money, I don't mean to put the blame at the feet entirely of big pharma, but a lot of it resides there. And that collusion between Wall Street, which is really not Wall Street because they turned their back on America decades ago, and big pharma and DC and politicians in your state capital.
And the military, it's all the Brownstone writers. They had the Department of Defense played a bigger role than most people realize.
Yep. So, Bill, you said earlier that it can be hard to get your head around and come to terms with the fact that we have a presence big enough, moneyed enough, powerful enough to have created and manage and maintain a narrative that really just flies in the face of truth and reality. And COVID is a prime example of that. But on the flip side of that coin, it actually isn't that difficult to imagine, because when you start looking, and it doesn't take a whole lot of your own research, you can see that deep state, I'm just going to sort of generally blanket use that term, deep state, has been doing it to other countries outside of the United States for decades. They're really, really good at it. You have people that are very good at creating color revolution and manipulating propaganda to create political outcomes. It's really not that big a leap of faith or imagination to understand that that was turned internal. And there's a lot to what led up to the ability of deep state to internalize that focus and work against their own people.
Heard your analysis of the fax machine's role in changing East Germany, which rings true to me. And then you move forward 20 years, and it's the internet and email, which was created to be so everybody could be their own publisher. And you're familiar with this alternative media line of thought, that what changed, everything changed for our powers that be around Brexit, or the early spring movement in the Mideast, where our rulers realized that all of their narratives and control programs could be threatened by the World Wide Web.
Yep.
And I think that's when they went into hyperdrive to control all the tech companies and media companies and start these censorship programs. You wouldn't think it would be possible to control something like the internet, but they came pretty close, or they tried, and they've had large success doing it. They saw this was a huge threat, and I guess their basic response was, these people like Bill Rice and Jonathan are threats. They're disinformation threat spreaders. They're extremists. They're conspiracy theorists. We have to cancel them, demonetize them, control their reach. And darn if they didn't do it. And then, what's shocking is that so many big companies like Facebook, Meta, Google, YouTube, on and on, went along with it. And we could talk about why they went along with it. I think they're making money from the 900-pound gorilla of the state, but they're also facing pressure, as we've seen with the Twitter files. And there's no doubt that the government put extreme pressure on these companies. And here we are. We're all waiting to see, is this going to change with President Trump and Bobby Kennedy and some of the key people he's appointed? We all better pray that it does change, because this is sinister, sinister stuff.
I'm going to encourage everybody not to wait and see. Don't wait and see. Don't assume that Trump means MAGA, or that Vivek Ramaswamy is going to change something, or that Elon Musk is going to change something. I remain hopeful that they actually go through with what they're talking about and maybe have some positive impact. However, I am absolutely firm and steadfast in my belief that the real change and the real work is at the we the people level. It needs to happen. Bill, I think you and I have talked about this in the past, but another key waypoint that I'm going to throw into our conversation for anybody that's not aware, I stumbled into the role of one of the national voices of precinct strategy. Dan Schultz, who is the man behind Precinct Strategy, has got the website precinctstrategy.com, the book, the podcast. He and I, twice a week on Tuesday afternoons at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we coach the country on citizen legislature, on the civics that's been missing from our K through 12 education since the late 60s, and the importance of getting involved in local politics. I cannot possibly overstate the importance of this. I don't believe that broad, massive, fundamental, bring America back to greatness is going to happen from the White House.
I don't either.
I mean, no offense to Donald Trump. I think he has the chops to go up against the deep state, and he's going to kind of rattle some things and probably have some good successes. The real major fundamental change has to come from we the people. And because we generally are not the type of society that's going to create rallies and go out there and insist physically and in the face of our state capitol and our representatives, especially after the false flag operation of January 6th. Once that took place, people got afraid of going out and meeting and organizing publicly. Where it works is for us to organize online, create that presence and that pressure, to do the emails and the phone calls to our state and federal representatives. But most importantly, it means getting involved in the political machine at the local level. That's the way that our government was designed. We got off the rails some decades ago. And now, for instance, our Republican Party is at best half strength. Most of the seats that are out there and available are vacant. They need people to step in and become a part of the voice of the Republican Party. That's how we reclaim from within. And to put a finer point on this, that's how we get back to having free, open, fair, honest legislature and journalism.
I couldn't agree more. Many of my readers tell me this. And I love Substack's reader comment section. And you talked about how there's smart viewers and readers on Substack. That's true. And one of the common themes I get is local grassroots movements, local elections, starting with your sheriff, your district attorney, your local state representative, your mayor, local civic groups. I've learned of some of these local groups. It takes leaders, but if you got the right leader, those local groups can grow pretty fast in a hurry, and they are going to have influence on local elections and local politics. And I think we are here in Troy, Alabama and Ohio are being naive if we think we're going to change this from Washington, D.C.
That's absolutely true. One of the key elements to that, there are great groups, clubs, or organizations. We've got a bunch of them in Ohio, these Patriot clubs, and they have great speaker series. They have meetups. They do protests and rallies on corners. Those are wonderful things to get involved with. I encourage every bit of it. But in addition, you, my listening audience, please look into Precinct Strategy. If you're in Ohio, we actually have a dedicated group, a site called ohioprecinctstrategy.org. Some states have a dedicated group that's focusing on getting patriotic, constitutional, conservative Americans involved in the body politic. Whatever your source of entry into that, it's fundamentally important. Sorry, I took us on a tangent there, Bill, but I couldn't resist. I have to get people aware of Precinct Strategy.
The important point is that think local, grassroots. You know, I think we were close to a tipping point when Ron Paul had his best known presidential election. I think it was in 2012. He had lots of momentum and fundraising was fantastic, and he was doing great in polling. And, you know, you had this Tea Party movement which I think was later co-opted by the Republican Party. But the authentic Tea Party movement was making a dent and changing things. And, Ron Paul was on the verge of winning the Iowa caucus, and then he would have won the New Hampshire primary. And who knows what would have happened. And then some story came out about him being a racist, and some newspaper articles he published in his newsletter 30 years earlier. And, they shot that down in a hurry. But that was really the last example of a fledgling grassroots organization that was starting to have influence. You can see it around the world. I mean, if something like that starts to have influence, it's nipped in the bud. So I guess we can say with this MAGA movement, they nipped it in the bud the last election, which I think was fraudulent, 2020, but they didn't this time because of grassroots countermeasures. Everybody knew what was getting ready to happen, and they voted in such large numbers that the election was too big to rig. So maybe we're on the cusp right now of some form of that at the national level. But you're absolutely right. That do what you can locally, support local leaders, and let's build it from the bottom.
I believe the fraud still happened. It was just down ballot. There was shenanigans and nefarious bad action that took place across the country in regions on issues and elections that were not Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I firmly believe that some of that stuff is, and it's kind of coming out in some of these exposés and a little bit of non-mainstream media coverage of what happened during the 2024 elections in local elections. But I want to pause and also plug another conversation that I had recently. You mentioned Brexit and the importance and significance of kind of the mainstream narrative, realizing that they could lose the narrative with the right kind of issue and public momentum, a big public push in some direction. David Murren was a recent guest on UnWoke.Academy. I would go back and listen to that one. It's a pretty eye-opening discussion that David Murren and I had. It had a lot to do with Brexit. He's British. I think he's currently in London, but he comes back and forth and loves the United States, and got an interesting perspective from the British perspective, but also spending a lot of time in the States. So go back and watch that one. One other thing that I would be remiss if I didn't interject, and this to me, it seems crystal clear. When we look at the actions of our enemy, the enemies are the anti-American globalist cabal, whatever you want to call them, the swampy deep state. Right now, one of the things that we're seeing coming out in the world of finance is all of this sort of fake quasi, oh, mea culpa, I'm going to reverse the DEI woke ESG agenda of these corporations. So a lot of these corporations, and I get emailed this stuff all the time, like Target is suddenly now not woke, or John Deere tractor, or fill in the blank, you name it, Carhartt, the clothing company. A bunch of these companies are now kind of repealing some of their woke stance on stuff. Don't buy it.
Now, what about Walt Disney?
I haven't seen a whole lot. They still seem woke as heck to me, but maybe they're scaling back.
They did pull the new Seven Dwarfs movie. They've where the Snow White was Latino, and
oh yeah, and she's been very vocal, and she's been saying a lot of anti-white, nasty, racist stuff or something like that.
I watch this Disney. I got two kids, and so I watch more Disney than I ever have. And for years, I've seen the quota system on the sexual orientation and the racial identity, which an executive said that every Disney content, movie, TV show has to have 40% of cast members that meet some label. And I see that in Disney productions. I see it on TV commercials, which just reinforces my view that this is all coordinated. I would love to know who is pushing this, but a lot of this cannot happen unless a lot of people got a memo saying this is what's going to happen. So I love your whole focus of the UnWoke Academy.
Oh yeah, follow the money. It's usually going to lead you to the culprits.
All the money.
So with all of this appearance that the woke stuff is being repealed, that impression is being cultivated so that we stop fighting. It's being cultivated so that all of us out here who are awake and aware and want America back again and want to reclaim Western values, we are supposed to just sort of sit back and maybe spend the next 4 years-ish just watching sports. And in the state of Ohio, probably we're supposed to be smoking weed and getting high now that they've passed that ridiculous marijuana bill. And just
hey, follow the money.
Yeah, you can follow the money there as well with the whole marijuana thing. But my point is, don't buy it. It is a false narrative meant to placate and keep us calm and distracted and subdued for long enough that the left to regroup after this last election and then come back at us twice as hard. What I say is no, roll up your sleeves. Now is the time to fight. We've got them on their heels. We've got a couple of wins, and we're starting to actually get some news out of Argentina with Milei. Milei, for the first time in something like 128 years, Argentina is not operating at a deficit. We need that in the United States. We need Doge. We need these really good appointments. We need a lot of stuff, and each of them.
We need a great purge. Donald Trump called it the drain the swamp, which is fine. But I call it the great purge. You know, I'll take a baby purge, but what we really need is a great purge. And when I say a great purge, I'm talking about a purge of pretty much every leader in every important organization in the country, from your local college to the public health bureaucracies, to the halls of Congress, to your local K-12 school. All as you've heard me say, Jonathan, I think that all the important quote unquote truth seeking organizations are completely captured. And the only way we're going to get them uncaptured is if we have a massive purge, which gets us back to where? How are we going to have a massive purge? They've got to first be exposed, which gets us to, it's going to take journalists to expose them. And then their message reaching enough people. So that kind of brings us back to where we started.
We need the journalists to expose it. Thank you again, Bill Rice Jr. And we're also going to need people at the local level to get active, involved, and engaged. And that means everything from just simply being aware of what's happening at the local level near you in politics, everything from your county commissioners and school board to health department to even getting involved. Yes, I said it. We need more people who are patriotic, constitutional, conservative, America First types to get out there and get involved. And that means all across the board. Bill, I want to thank you for joining me on today's UnWoke.Academy episode. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for all you do, and please do keep it up.
Well, thank you. Right back at you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.